Hello and good afternoon, everyone. This is Jason Miller with the Tennessee Division of Natural Areas, and I want to discuss an ongoing restoration project we've got that's located just a mile or two from a site discussed earlier. May Prairie State Natural Area is located in pretty close proximity to the Sinking Pond Natural Area that was presented on previously. Now, May Prairie itself is about a 500-acre site on the eastern Highland Rim, but it contains our largest and most intact relict eastern Highland Rim wet prairie in Tennessee. It's probably the most significant botanical site in the state. And the Haggard Tract restoration is not on the prairie itself, but on an adjacent management unit located next to the prairie. So to kind of get a sense for what we're doing at May Prairie, I wanted to start with some historic aerial imagery. This crescent-shaped feature here is what we currently call May Prairie. If you look at this image, you can see that it used to extend pretty far to the north and to the west from where it lies currently. But if you bump up a couple decades into the 60s, you can see that that far northwestern section of the prairie had started to close in pretty well. The red arrows on these images sort of represent what we refer to as the Haggard Tract historically. So you can see looking back into the 40s that there was an open condition in this area. By the 60s, that had closed in almost entirely, and we started to see a little bit of development in the area. By the late 70s, you can see it was once again cleared entirely, and that development along its periphery had really picked up some steam. By 2012, we kind of got into the condition that we see today with some pretty hard edges where the site had just been treated as an ag field for a number of decades. Here we are looking a little bit closer at that imagery from the 1970s, and you can still make out the prairie, still open, but just looking a little bit closer at the Haggard Tract, you can see some of the alteration that had been completed on the site. You see a pretty distinct straight line where the former stream had been channelized, and you also see these sort of perpendicular grooves cut across the Haggard Tract. And the reason for that was that the previous owner, the Haggard family, had tried to convert this into row crops. So with it being, naturally a wet prairie system, it was just a little bit too wet to grow crops on, and so they tried to drain that. Over time, they eventually figured out that that wasn't going to work. The site remained too wet, so they converted it in its entirety into a fescue field to try and run cattle on it. The site remained in fescue up until about the mid-1990s when the state acquired it from the Haggard family. And restoration efforts began at that time, first with the application of herbicide to remove fescue from the field, and then repeated prescribed fires to try and keep the woodies at bay until native herbaceous species repopulated the area. This had some limited success, but it was about 2012 when a large-scale stream restoration project was implemented that really brought the site back. You can see in these images where the banks were laid back and channelization was removed from the stream. If you look at the red arrows below on the images, you can see where sinuosity was restored to the stream. It sort of meanders through the Haggard Tract now. And then additionally, the perpendicular ditches I noted earlier have been disconnected from the stream channel. This increases residence time of water in the Haggard Tract so that it's restored to a more wet prairie type condition that would have naturally occurred in the area. Another major step to restoring the Haggard Tract was reseeding the site with native vegetation from May Prairie. These images illustrate that effort with hay being cut on the prairie proper, hay bales being redistributed over the Haggard Tract, which, as you can see in this image, was pretty much just a mowed field at that time. The lower image represents what the site looks like today. You can see it's much more diverse than the fescue patch it was previously. Having just visited the site last week, results are very encouraging. We saw a pretty great bloom of Platanthera nivea, which was previously only known from May Prairie itself in the entire state of Tennessee. It's a state endangered species. We've also seen the state threatened Eryngium integrifolium and a pretty rare milkweed, Asclepias hurtella, on the site. Overall, we'd have to say that both the seeding and the hydraulic restoration have been a huge success on the Haggard Tract. I'll be happy to take any of your questions.